What's good, everybody? My name is Alckemy. Today we're going to be taking a look at the fuse compressor, which I think is very interesting to discuss, especially if you're into the world of OTT. Now, prior to this, I never really liked the sound of OTT because it always made it just seem like it was just like boosting the highs so much and removing everything else under it to the point that I was like, this is so flat that I really disliked it. But this in particular, especially with snares, has been incredibly interesting to give it a shot. Now, to be fair, the fuse compressor is not an OTT, but because it is a multi-band compressor that is sound design oriented and it can do both upwards and downwards compression at the same time, it'd be very difficult to not compare. This has 6 bands instead of 3, but I do find that because you have more bands, you have more control over what's happening. Arguably, I don't want to say the most important part. I would say like the mids is usually like the biggest thing, but those high ends and taming that crispiness is equally as important whenever you start talking about things along the lines of like snares and stuff. So I've got this chonk snare that I've made. Here it is. This is just whatever is made within Faceplant, but if I turn all of these on, Diz2 culture, all that, this is my normal drum processing and whatnot, it sounds like this. Now, if I were to add in the fuse compressor, though, with everything turned on, it just has a nice little punch to it that's added, at least in my opinion, that's like, that's really nice. Versus, sorry, wrong one. I don't know if you can tell or not, but that actually sounds a lot more like a snare. Like, whereas if I'm not using the fuse compressor, don't get me wrong, like this smacks, and if we look at this on a oscilloscope, then you can see that, you know what I mean, that's just ungodly. But even still, I don't think that this changes the dynamics that much, but it just has like this smoothed out sound that I really think is useful for things like drums and whatnot. So that being said, Jake from Minimal Audio, the developer and I think the CEO, if anything, has said this in his own review of this, that this isn't really for like mastering. You probably could if you use it subtly, but for me in particular, I would most likely want to use this on as a means of sound design for pulling specific tones out. So let's try another example and we'll just have some fun with this. I'm going to pull up a bass, say from Faceplant, like from my Requiem pack. I'm not saying that you need to go cop this, but just, hey, like this is stuff that I'm doing, so hopefully that's fair. Fear Factory is pretty cool. This is something that I can make a lot of different sounds with just by hitting a note. So if I play a low D, then let's go ahead and turn the delay on. That's going to give us a little bit more. You can hear that we've got some pretty gnarly sounds that are coming out of this. And because it's always different, I think this is a great example because what we're going to be sending through into the fuse compressor is like a wide variety of sounds. So because of that, we can pull this up. And one thing that I also want to cover, which I just absolutely adore, that is like baked in within every plugin of Minimal Audio, is this guy. Thank you so much. This is a soft clipper / hard clipper that's built in. I'm like, yes. That's such a yes. That just makes me happy. So a quick overview. We've got up to 6 bands on this. You can see that these little guys up top are upwards compression, or sorry, downwards compression. And then we're adjusting the ratio on an individual basis. And then these guys are downwards, or sorry, oh my gosh, downwards compression, upwards compression. I'm sorry, guys. And then in between that, we can move these bands and also move the output here if we want to. So these are the thresholds that we can adjust. And if we want to do them all together, you can see that we can kind of smoosh everything as a whole, which is probably what I'll end up doing. But I like that we can adjust this because we can turn the output up, say on the top end of this, but generally in this region here, let me see, crossover from like 5 to 10K, this can get kind of sharp, so we might want to adjust that and try to mellow that out. Also, if you notice, sometimes these low mids can get relatively resonant, so it might make more sense to add a little bit of downwards compression to those low mids in order to control that and make it a more balanced sound. So we don't quite need to turn this up that much, but maybe just a little bit here. And now what I want to do is I'm going to turn the threshold up all the way on this, and let's go ahead and pull the ratio up and the threshold, and let's see what happens when we get a super squash sound. So, wow. Now we can kind of back off of this just a little bit. Now, likewise, if we wanted to, we can switch this over into a respace, and this is going to, we'll turn this off because this is just on the initial FM amount, but we can kind of play along with the pitching of this and adjust this accordingly as well. So. So for me in particular, obviously what I would most likely use this on is something kind of like basses like this. So there's that. But also with snares, I find that it has just a nice little like smearing of everything, and also helps it actually have that snare punch that I find that a lot of my drums are usually lacking. So let's go ahead and do one more example before we close the video, because this is more of like a show and tell as opposed to getting down into like really needing to understand compression as a whole. You got to move the bands and figure out what works for you. But let's go ahead and find the chunky kick, which, let me see here, kick a thonkadonk, which sounds like this. So this is already a pretty large kick. As you can see, this is all it is. If you guys want to know more about drum stuff, especially with faceplant, then be sure to check out my masterclasses for the ARCANUM members. I also have a course for sale for drums that is on my website. But let's go ahead and take a fuse compressor now and see what happens if I want to add a little bit more punch to that. So let's go ahead and add 6 bands here. And let's go ahead and push this up just a little bit, and then we're going to do the same thing to where we adjust the ratio and the threshold. So from that, we can actually maybe even remove some of this. If we want to make it a little bit more boxy, we can do that. Ooh, okay. We can tilt this, which is really nice. So what a tilt does is you think about it like an EQ. So if you want it to have more high end and less low end, you can do that. If you want it to be the opposite with more low end and less high end, then you can do that. That's backwards, sorry, but that's, yeah. So that actually sounds pretty nice, but we can back off of the threshold just a little bit. We can also add more attack. So if you wait on drums for the attack to come in and have a long release, then usually that's going to result in them being more punchy. So that sounds pretty nice. We can pull off of this one like I did before. I think that was a smart choice. And then we can also maybe even remove some of the high end of this. So we went from something kind of like this to something that just kind of punches out a little bit more. And then we can find a lot of different answers, because I'm not looking for the right answer with this. I'm just looking for an answer or something that is going to give me a little bit more variety in between all of this. But as you can tell, there's quite a lot of different sounds or different kicks that we're getting just by sending this through. right? That's a bit much. There's our knock right there, which is also really cool because this will teach you a lot about drums, or at least about kicks as a whole, especially with fundamentals and what you're trying to pull out. So and then what we can always do is back off of this and have a nice little mix in between. And, you know, just kind of try to find a happy ground. I do want to see if this has any kick presets built into it. So maybe what we can do is just try something like drum smackdown or something and see if that will change the timbre of this. Maybe some of these other ones, air fuse, mid scoop, telephone. So these seem to be more like effects, if you will. Let's try extra punch. That sounds good. Fuse and chill. This sounds pretty nice. Kick control, pad detailer, parallel 80s. That kind of smooths everything out a little bit. And remember, you don't have to run this at 100%. You can always kind of back off of the mix and stuff. But as you can see, there's a lot of different shaping that we can do with the different frequency bands of dynamics. And dynamics is basically the difference between loud and quiet parts of either a sound or a multitude of sounds. And so when you're mangling this on a 6-band thing, you can be like, all right, I want my mids to kind of pop out like this, boom. And then I want my high mids to kind of duck when it does that. And you can kind of control that all in one. And that's why I like this quite a bit. So because of that, this is definitely, for me, my OTT replacement. Extra Records has been around for a long time. This thing is almost 10 years old, if you think about it. And Ableton's is even older, which is where this whole thing originated. And like, yeah, you can do this in phase plan and all that in multipass or whatever, but you know what I mean? Like I said, I just like to see what's out there and see what's available. But if you listen to this and try to get a similar result, like, let's just mess with this and I'll show you what happens. So this is pretty much all you have though. You can adjust this, but you can't control this on an individual basis. So if you turn down the upwards compression, then the downwards compression goes up, because that's how this works. You also can't separate these like you can in Ableton. So and what I mean by that is that there's a gap right here between the upwards and downwards. So you can adjust this with the downwards compression, and this has automatic makeup gain built into it, which is why it gets louder. So if I turn the downwards compression up, you'll see that it's just squashing it. But when we back off of this, you'll notice that the signal is getting louder. So likewise, it's not so noticeable there, but there's a little bit more of a click or whatever. But I just don't feel like there's nearly as much of a variety of sound sound palette or like sound sculpting that you can do with this as compared to something like this that has control over everything, which is really nice. There are some other things on here, like you can choose between this and mid-side mode. So if you want to do like some mid-side compression, then like that's also available. That's kind of advanced. Not a lot of people, that's not true. It's not to say that a lot of people do this, but if you're a beginner, you probably won't even be worrying about this. If you're advanced, this might be super useful to you. But yeah, aside from that, there is this is really everything that you need for an OTT style of just mangling sounds, which I think is really cool. And also the clipper, man, the clipper. If anything, you could totally just leave this off or set this as a one band and just set the threshold to be super duper high and turn the ratio down to where you're doing almost 0 to very little, and just be like, boop, I'm going to clip it. And then you could compress everything as a whole, or you use multiband or whatever. But like this, man, I want this built into everything. thanks minimal audio. So anyways, let me know what you all think about this. We did a couple of different examples, and I'm kind of curious to know what your thoughts are. If you all have any questions, feel free to hit me up. Otherwise, go check out for yourselves whether or not Fuse Compressor is something that you're interested in. And I will see you all in the next one.